Good evening. Justice delayed, they say, is justice denied. But I would say that justice, whenever it comes, is still a hell of a sight better than the alternative. And today we have heard a welcome announcement from the Prime Minister about a mass exoneration of postmasters and postmistresses caught up in the Horizon scandal. This is not a moment for celebration. Too much misery, financial ruin, stress, imprisonment and even death has happened to too many entirely innocent British people for that. But it's good news of a kind. And before we close the final chapter on this awful story, there are important questions to be answered. A back of the envelope, or rather a smartphone calculation by me, suggests the compensation bill will be more than £500 million. Now, I might be wrong, it might be a lot more than that, but should it be paid entirely or mainly by taxpayers? Given the central role of Fujitsu and its computer system in this disaster, will the government tell them to pay out? Fujitsu, who built the Horizon system, have won nearly 200 different public contracts in the last 12 years, worth just under £7 billion, and covering much of what the British state does, from the Home Office and the Ministry of Defence and the Foreign Office, through to the tax authorities, the police and the National Health Service. Earlier today, I asked Number 10 whether Fujitsu was simply too big, too dominant and too interwoven through the government delivery for the government to take it on. And I was assured they would be held to account. We will see. And then there's the whole murky question of private prosecutions, which can be brought by individuals or companies. The Post Office has been doing this since 1683. But given how investigators for the Post Office, working for bonuses, acted in these cases, can we trust private companies to go after individuals? Shouldn't it all be handed over to the Crown Prosecution Service? In 2020, the Justice Select Committee called for a register of all private prosecutions, a code of standards for private prosecutors and investigators, and for the CPS oversight role to be beefed up. At the very least, it's surely time to get on with that. A question perhaps for the Justice Secretary, Alex Chalk, who happens to be with me in the studio now. But before I talk to him, let me speak to a journalist who has been following this story since the dawn of time, Richard Brooks of Private Eye. Richard, very good to see you there. It's clearly a good news announcement today, but there are a few things hanging around I think you would like to hear more about. Can you just tell me, above all, what your concerns are?
Well, I think there's some details specifically on the compensation scheme that needs to be worked out. You know, how quickly it's going to be done, what the victims are going to need to prove, whether the £600,000 one-off offer remains, and also I think there are questions for those whose convictions have not been overturned, those who have been to the Criminal Cases Review Commission and had their convictions upheld. There seems an element of what they could claim is unfairness, because people in exactly the same circumstances who've not had their cases yet referred will now fall within this blanket returning of convictions. So there's an inconsistency there.
Those are all good questions, Richard. What about the sort of culture of silence inside the system while this went on year after year after year? I know that various politicians, including Andy Burnham on this programme and Theresa May before that, have said there should be a new duty of candour on public servants to allow people to speak out more freely. Would you agree with that?
I would, but along with the duty has to come a lot of protection as well, because in any big organisation, but particularly in one like the Post Office with a fairly toxic culture at the time, it is extremely difficult to speak out. It's career-ending. I've been working with whistleblowers for a couple of decades, and there are vanishingly few of them. They all effectively end their careers. They can't get another job. So it takes a serious commitment, and most people are not prepared to do it quite reasonably. In the last couple of days, in the wake of the ITV drama, I've had quite a few emails from people who worked in Fujitsu saying, well, yeah, it was terrible back in the day, but I didn't say anything, couldn't say anything, and I feel terrible about it now. There is this sort of, while we have freedom of speech generally, Britain, in corporate life, in the workplace, we simply don't have freedom of speech. It's almost totalitarian. You can't speak out against your boss without serious. We need to address that culture through a number of measures. And it's all very well saying a duty standard, but you need seriously to improve whistleblower legislation, perhaps going as far as incentivizing whistleblowing. So it's not just a matter of protecting whistleblowers, but rewarding them as well.